Thank you, Pplpleasr, for joining me on the podcast today. I've been looking forward to this conversation. Your success over the last year plus has been pretty cool to watch. You're a multidisciplinary artist who really got a lot of notoriety over the last year or so for doing digital art and NFTs and everything crypto related with well-known projects like Uniswap and a number of others. So looking forward to digging into your story and a lot of these projects and just the whirlwind that this last year plus must have been. But for those who don't know you, I think the best place to start would be if you could just share your story. Long version, always appreciated, and starting as early as you're willing to. That would be great.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me on. And so for those listening who don't know, you did a pretty good job introducing me. So I guess maybe we can start from when I first sort of discovered crypto, which was in college. And I had first heard about Bitcoin and also Dogecoin back then. I was intrigued, but being that I didn't have money and my main priorities were just finding a job, I didn't think too much into it until 2017, when I basically had started working a little bit, and then I had saved up a little bit of money, and then I was looking into ways that I could basically invest this money, and then so that's how I dove further into crypto, because I guess it was in a way less boomer feeling than traditional finance, and more internet native. So it was honestly, ironically, easier for me to understand than things to do with traditional finance and investing there. And so that's how I started diving into it. Started looking at crypto subreddits, and then through there, I bought some 2017 ICO coins, rode the bull run all the way to the top, and then tried to convince my parents that this is the future. And then obviously the bear market hit, and then so my parents were like, "See, this is not a real thing." And then I had to, sort of just forget about it and go back to doing my regular job. But I just did hold my crypto. I didn't sell. And then so I rode all the way through the bear market. And then basically what happened was last year in 2020, and by the way, through this entire time, ever since college, I've been working mainly as a visual effects artist, just doing 3D computer graphics for movies, game cinematics, and all that kind of stuff. And then so when the pandemic happened, I was supposed to go get a job at Apple as a digital artist, but then they rescinded my offer due to sort of visa reasons that were related to the pandemic. And then being in a situation where I was unemployed and living in New York, which was expensive, I was sort of forced to look into other means of making money again. And also during this time, I, for the first time since college, started creating just artwork that were just my own creative expressions, because obviously up until this date, I had been working for studios and game vendors and just executing on other people's creative vision. And then so sort of with all of the technical skills that I had gathered throughout my years of working in the industry, I applied them. And just to pass time while I was applying for jobs, make my own artwork, digital artwork. So yeah, it really was just sort of a way to make me feel like the days could go by a little bit faster, or that I was doing something productive with my time. But really my main goal there was to actually find a real job. And then, so then I discovered DeFi that summer, because DeFi, it's also now known as DeFi summer. That was the summer when decentralized finance was really starting to pick up. And every time something like this happens, it creates this sort of mini wave in crypto again, and then people either they start to hear about it again, and so that's kind of how I heard about it. I went looking on crypto Twitter and noticed that while there was a lot of sort of meme marketing going on, but there was seriously a lack of creative talent within the space. And then being that I was unemployed, I just was joking to my friend saying that, oh, somebody in this industry should hire me to just make better visual material for the space. And then at the time, so during DeFi summer, anybody who lived through it knew that Blue Kirby was like the biggest, like, sort of like influencer at the time. He was doing marketing for Wi-Fi. And then so he had made a tweet saying that he was looking for somebody who was really good with video editing. And then my friend sort of just like DM'd him my art Instagram that I had been putting my little sort of digital art on. And then Blue Kirby saw it and he thought it was really cool. And then so he reached out to me, and then that's when I made my like sort of like first ever commissioned DeFi animation was for Yearn Finance. And then hilariously, that animation actually never ended up being released because the product that we were making it for had sort of like, a delay or falling through. But it does exist. And then and then one by one, like I also still at this time was still viewing this as like almost like a part-time gig, because I was like, okay, well, it's cool that I can, and I was getting paid in crypto, so I was like, it's cool that I can, get paid a little bit in crypto here and there for doing these commissions. But I was still trying to look for a real job, right? But literally, I was like unemployed for more than a year. Like I was job hunting for more than a year. And at some point I was just thinking, I actually was wondering if I was ever going to get a job again, because it's just getting rejected left and right. Like that year was really tough. It was so hard to get employment during the pandemic, especially as a non-citizen, I would say. And then so I just continued to do my DeFi commissions on the side. And then soon enough, through word of mouth, I guess, like all of the protocols started hitting me up, because every time I would release an animation, like it was just so different and new from anything that anybody was seeing in the space. And then so very quickly, all these protocols were like sliding into my DMs and asking if they can have like an animation made for their brand. And then I started to make this like Trello board where to sort of keep organized of all my inbound, I would have like, it really all started with one folder on my computer called Wi-Fi, and then that folder now has like 20 something subfolders of all the other DeFi protocols. And then I had to line them up on this sort of board to keep myself organized. And then I was just sort of like doing them one by one. And then I guess like 20 something animations later, I had built up, I think by this point, a lot of people in DeFi already knew of me just through my animations. And then also in March of this year, I released the animation that I made for the Uniswap V3 announcement. And also, anybody who was sort of around during like DeFi and crypto at the time knew that Uniswap V3 announcement was like a really, really big deal. And so I would say, sort of telling my story up to this date, there have been, several points in my accidental crypto career that I have identified as something that could be a big opportunity. And definitely I saw the Uniswap V3 announcement as one of them. And so whenever one of these things come my way, I sort of do everything in my power to make sure that I'm using my skill set to the max to sort of optimize the opportunity that's given to me. And well, lo and behold, this is also when NFTs started blowing up. And, starting from DeFi summer, I had minted and sold a few NFTs here and there. But, I never really sort of made it my main thing, because it was a time where I knew that you had to have some kind of notoriety to even sell NFTs, right? Like at the time, super rare, like platforms that were gated, like super rare and like Nifty Gateway and stuff were pretty strict on who they were letting in. It was mostly based on like, you're already a famous digital artist on Instagram or something then. And I didn't have any of that. So obviously I didn't really have a chance. And then, so really my goal here was just to I was like, oh, well, if my reputation sort of permeated over to the NFT space, then maybe I could just sell NFTs here and there as a job instead, because, basically at some point when I got so busy with my DeFi commissions, I thought, okay, well, maybe there's a chance that this could just become my actual job and I don't actually need to find a real job anymore. And then so I pitched the idea of selling also the animation as an NFT to Uniswap, the team, and then, and donating the proceeds to charity. And they were super on board with the idea. And so I think I executed it on a very timely manner. It was sort of during the peak of that period's like NFT boom, I would say. And then the piece ended up selling for 310 ETH, and Pplpleasr was formed. And then since then, I've been just continuously participating in sort of the crypto ecosystem. Like, I don't see myself as just like a linear NFT artist. I have similar skill sets to other artists, but I would say hopefully like my role is more of like evangelizing crypto, and just kind of participating in the whole industry and hopefully rewarding people that are, like active and participating in crypto as well, and not just on the NFT side. They're all kind of blurring together now, which is good. Yeah, and then so, this summer I've done a bunch of other things. Like in June, I partnered with ENS to celebrate their like 4th anniversary. We airdropped like 100 free Pplpleasr NFTs to people, and that was really fun. And then I did an NFT in July to help crowdfund the Ethereum documentary. And then in August, which is probably what a lot more people now know me for, was that cover I did for Fortune magazine, which heavily featured a bunch of crypto Twitter influencers. The cover went like really, really viral. And then like on the sides, obviously I've been like doing other NFT stuff as well. But yeah, sort of like my main goal and navigation in this space is to simultaneously like spread crypto awareness and positively to people, and also at the same time use my platform and voice to also propel values that I believe in, such as like charitable giving, volunteering, and I don't know, like sharing and creating wealth, things like that. So yeah.
That's awesome. I appreciate the long version. It's an amazing story. So I appreciate you sharing it. I guess when you were, you thought you were going to go work at Apple, and then because of COVID, the offer gets rescinded, and you sort of you described it as like an accidental career in crypto. You really just sort of fell into it, following your passions, posting art on Instagram. That leads to doing some commissions. Next thing you know, here you are, and pretty busy year, I would say, for quote unquote unemployment. But when did you realize that you actually didn't really need to like find a traditional job, that what you were doing, you have this folder that's blowing up with opportunities. Like you mentioned, you started having to organize things. Um, was it sudden or sort of gradual that you realized like, hey, I actually don't really need a job. I can make a living selling NFTs and doing what I'm doing now. And then as a follow-up to that, like your first big project, as far as I understand it, was the Uniswap sale, where it sounds like, they had you for a commission, but you were the one who suggested selling it as an NFT and donating it to charity. At that point in your, in your story, you're not like super made yet on like all the, Fortune cover, all these other things that have happened since. Was that like an obvious decision for you at the time to donate your proceeds for this first big NFT to charity, or maybe you didn't know that it would sort of blow up the way that it did?
I definitely didn't know that it was gonna blow up the way that it did. I think sort of growing up, my parents have, sort of like always participated in things like charity or, like volunteering. It's kind of just values that were sort of set within the family. And then so, yeah, I think it naturally was just something that I always had, an interest in, at least like when I have, sort of like access abilities myself. being that I wasn't, ever like making a lot of money ever in my career, maybe until, sort of like NFTs became a thing. Every year maybe I would donate like, or I would, go on like websites like GiveWell and then research some charities and then end up being like, okay, well, I can only donate like $100 to $200. And it just didn't seem like super substantial to me at the time, right? And then so when NFTs became a thing, I sort of saw it as, oh, wow, well, this is an opportunity for me to be able to donate something actually substantial. And and I mean, in all honesty, another part of it was also that, I felt like it was easier as well to get Uniswap to agree to something like this because, like, let's say if I didn't say to sell it for charity, how are we even supposed to like, I don't know. I feel like obviously now knowing how chill everyone is and like Web3 is all about decentralization and it's all very cool. But I was coming from a very sort of like Web2 world as well as working in like visual effects and like Hollywood studios where IP is something that is so frequently fought over. And like with this animation that they were commissioning me to do, it was like not clear who actually owns IP, right? So like, let's say we sold this in an NFT, like who gets to keep what percentage of proceeds doesn't even make sense. And then so also just to make it easier, I was like, why don't we just donate all of it to charity? And obviously Uniswap were doing super well at the time. And so they're just like, yeah, we don't need the money. That sounds like a great idea.
And how do you look back on this period where like you mentioned you're applying for jobs and getting rejected and like you're clearly like super skilled and had a great, start to your career in working at Blizzard and obviously got accepted to Apple in the first place. But these companies that you're applying to, it's not connecting for whatever reason. But on the side, you're building what ends up in a matter of like a year or two being this incredibly successful brand of your own. Do you look back at like, obviously those rejections, I imagine many of them, like you're pretty glad that they didn't work out. How do you reflect on that experience of just like trying, getting rejected, and then going off on the side and like just following your passions, it sounds like, and that ends up being the thing that really ends up working out in the first place.
I mean, I obviously feel so incredibly blessed that this ended up, working out for me because, I think just like anybody else, right? Like, in a previous world, as in when I say previous, I mean like Web 2, we're taught so heavily to think that all of our value and worth is usually like tied to employment or big, studios and big brands. And so, I remember when I was trying to like post things on my personal Instagram, and just seeing accounts that had, tenfold more followers than mine did. I was just thinking, well, if I can't even get an actual job, I don't even know how long it's going to take me to, sort of accelerate my social following, I would say. And just to make this part of the story a little bit more relatable to people who might be listening, it definitely was hard. I think that especially that summer during the pandemic, um, it's a little bit almost a blessing in disguise that there was a pandemic because my unemployment actually started before the pandemic, uh, a little bit before the pandemic went into full swing, and so people were still going into work and having worked for so many years myself and then suddenly having to stay at home all the time while all your friends are still going to work, so very lonely and feeling of just feeling very low and unaccomplished really, and it was not something that I was used to. And so yeah, I mean, I wasn't trying to sort of find purpose or anything. It was really just to actually keep myself from going insane. I had to find something for myself to do that wasn't just playing video games or surfing the internet. And I thought, well, I might as well just sort of brush up on my generalist skill sets. So yeah, it was definitely a huge stark contrast because what I did perceive as, sort of a career that had started off well, and when it goes sideways like that, it really was very difficult for me to sort of wrap my head around. I often called my parents during this time and asked them, oh, if it's because I wasn't talented enough or, if I'm not working hard enough, I just don't know what I'm doing wrong. And then I think sort of the moment of transition when it happened was, I remember this was after DeFi summer. So it was probably around like November of 2020, I would say. And I had done quite a few, DeFi commissions already at this point, enough to sort of call it a salary, let's say. And then I remember I was still interviewing for jobs. And then I was actually interviewing with a company that I had previously already worked for. I worked for their headquarters in London, and I was interviewing for their New York branch. And then actually that year in 2020, I interviewed with them twice, and both times they rejected me. And I was just thinking, man, I've already worked here before. Like, how can you reject me when I've already worked here? Like, you guys already know that I can work here. I mean, I have to say, visual effects is such a competitive industry. And, there's so many things about it that make it very, very difficult for people to find lasting employment in the industry. So that's maybe something that, is a little bit different than other industries like tech but yeah. And then after that interview and then sort of getting rejected, I was just kind of thought to myself, well, why am I having to bend over backwards, and try to get a job at the studio when I already have something that's kind of working out for myself, on the side with these DeFi commissions. And then so I think it was starting from there where I really sort of started to realize like there's a chance that I could just keep doing this instead of trying so hard to make something else work that's clearly not working.
So having gone through this, like I know myself, like I'm a big proponent of the quote unquote like gap year. It doesn't have to be exactly a year, but taking some time where you don't have work or school. Like I had done one during college after my freshman year and then another after my first job. And both times sort of, similar to you, like, got rejected from a bunch of jobs leading up to it or whatever it was. And just came out of the experience, however it happened, in a much better place than I sort of went in.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously that's been the same for you, tenfold or however many fold. But how do you like reflecting on that experience? Would you recommend, maybe your temporary unemployment like wasn't an intentional thing and you wouldn't have wished it upon yourself, but looking back, you're grateful it happened. Would you, based on that experience, like recommend to others to consider, obviously you don't want to just quit your job if you like don't have any money saved up or anything like that, do something like super irresponsible. But if you have a reasonable runway, having gone through this experience yourself and like seeing the ups and downs of it, and it was tough at times and lonely, and you're sort of like, following your passions, not so much out of like some purpose driven thing, but just to sort of like make something of your days, but it all ends up working out. And having seen that in retrospect, do you think like others could sort of experience similar success by giving themselves that sort of experimental time to do things a little bit differently than all their friends who are, going to work every day and everything like that, and sort of just taking some time and figuring things out?
Well, I think everybody has a different risk appetite, and sort of growing up in an Asian household, I definitely think, maybe there's like a trend with Asian parents where you always sort of take the safest route. And so, probably for that reason is why I never sort of wanted to intentionally take a year off, for example. And it was always just the mindset of as long as I have a job, I should just keep working and save as much money as I can. But I do feel that if anybody is sort of privileged enough, as in they've had money saved up and can afford to do so, it's definitely worth trying, especially right now as Web3 is taking off. I don't think we've seen sort of like the full blown effects of this entire industry yet. And so, where I think we are at the forefront of it, and the opportunity cost of not jumping into something like this is huge, I think. And so if you have sort of, a hunch even that what you're currently doing might not be the best use of, your creative talents or skill sets, then I definitely think it is worth looking into. And I cannot stress enough that I am just incredibly lucky to have ended up, in the situation that I am. But during my years of working in visual effects, I did always have this feeling that this wasn't really probably the best use of my time. But at the same time, I didn't know if there was anything else that I should be doing. And, I didn't want to take a risk by taking a year off to discover myself or anything, just sort of with the way that I was brought up and everything. But definitely, when I started doing the DeFi animations, it's not even that it was crypto. Obviously, just separately, crypto on the blockchain technology and everything was something that I discovered in 2017. I personally believe and have been interested in. But I do think that process of just carrying out, being creative director of my own animations, even if they're extremely short, right? So, I went from working on Hollywood movies to literally 20 to 30-second animations of, a fraction, tiny fraction of the production quality. But just the fact that I had that kind of overdrive for being able to dictate where the animation was going or how the narrative goes and everything, which I felt like, was more of my strong suit. That just created an environment where I was so much more invested. And I would say my ability to sort of shine was through the creative freedom that I was given to do that. So if anybody is, thinking that their job sort of limits what they can do best, and, they are in a situation where they can take some time off and sort of explore other opportunities. And we're lucky enough to be in a time where Web3 is just taking off. There are plenty of job opportunities, maybe jobs that we don't even know exist yet, that are waiting for people. Then I would definitely encourage it.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense and it is good advice for a lot of people. I think a lot of people generally feel, not totally utilized. And of course, like it's a lot to ask to feel like you're operating at like max impact of what you can contribute at any time or at every given time. But at the very least, if you feel like it's just sort of every day is sort of repetitive and it's starting to feel more and more like you're not getting to flex your skills and do what you're good at, then maybe it's time to consider something else. Not being too unreasonable about it, I guess is what I'm saying. But when it starts to get pretty, dreadful or whatever it might be, that there is another way to go about things. And if you're sort of responsible about saving and plan a little bit and just take calculated risks. Some people, to your point, like have a different appetite than others, but with risk comes reward. And I think from your experience, it's apparent that even though you didn't necessarily choose it from the first place, like it certainly worked out, after really not a very long period of time. You mentioned, going from like speaking more on this, like sort of utilizing your skills, you were sort of in like an execution mode in your old jobs, and then you got to go into like being more of like a creative director of your own work. What was the biggest sort of, how do you compare and contrast the difference in that? Like, because you're working on something that like, granted it's a different length and a different context, but you're still, I think, leveraging a lot of the same skills, but there's maybe like another bucket of more, using your imagination or sort of operating more as an artist than like an executionist. How was that transition for you? And like, what did you enjoy about getting to sort of operate at a much higher level than you had experienced in the past?
I mean, I think that is essentially every creative person's dream, is to ultimately execute on your own creative visions. But I do find that I see a lot of artists, but I think fine art is a totally different category, which is why there's all these different nuances with how NFTs are approached and everything. But at least for me personally, I do feel like all of those years that I spent working at studios and stuff were actually pretty essential to contributing to my success today. Because when I started making these little short form animations, without the skill set that I had heard over the years, even if I had a really good idea, it's extremely difficult to actually execute or express that if you don't have the technical abilities to do it, right? Unless obviously you hire other people to do it, but then you need money for that. And so I personally think that it's super important to get, one cannot exist without the other. Like you can have really good ideas, but if you're not able to execute them, then it's useless. And then you can have really good skill sets, but then if you don't have good ideas, then you're better off making other people's visions. That's sort of how I see it.
And this is maybe a bit of a tricky question, but and so understand that you might not have like a super practical or applicable response, but I'm curious, like taking those different sides of the equation, sort of the ability to execute and the ability to have the ideas, or the imagination to have the ideas and sort of creative taste. How do you think, like looking back, you developed both of those skills separately? Like one, I mean, for the visual effects, like was that something you learned in school or took upon yourself in high school, or how did that sort of come to be from? That's probably more of a practical answer that you might have. And then on sort of the imaginative and creative side, how do you think that sort of developed, especially after years of not really being able to like flex that muscle, just being on the
Mhm.
execution side?
Yeah, I think on the creative side, I've always been, I don't really like to use the word creative because I do genuinely, without trying to sound like a people pleaser, I do genuinely think every person on this earth is creative by nature, and everybody just has a different way of expressing it, whether you're a developer, a writer, an artist. Like, because I feel like so many times, the word creative is only used to describe people who are in, let's say a traditionally creative field. So like art or music, that kind of stuff. But you can be a lawyer and also be a very creative person. But sort of what contributed to my artistic sort of like visions, I think was just ever since a young age, I like to draw. And I also love consuming like movies. I loved watching like Pixar animated movies, Miyazaki films. I grew up watching anime. And then I just sort of, I feel like I'm just like a sponge, just growing up, all kinds of media. It could be a commercial on TV or something. Whenever I see something that's very interesting and eye-catching or sort of like lingers the mind, I always sort of try to archive in my brain and just make a mental note of that thing. And maybe when I'm older and more mature, I can go look back on it or look for that specific piece of media and maybe get into sort of dig into more of why it was lingering in the mind. Was there anything that was sort of more special about it that made me remember it more? And with my personal work, I think I have sort of two sort of like holy grails that I kind of follow, which have been worked out pretty well so far, which is like, if you take like a look at Japanese commercials, for example, they're always, have an element of humor and are also just very ridiculous and over the top. And in a way, memes like spread like wildfire also because they have that ridiculous, over the top or exaggerated element. And then so that's kind of like a principle that I was injecting into my early sort of DeFi animations. And then if it wasn't that route, then I would go sort of, what I had always found to be really cool was trippy elements. So I love listening to music and I like going to concerts. And I have noticed that humans respond extremely well to audio, visual, complementary experiences. And then so, in my videos, like if it wasn't some kind of super ridiculous over the top plot, then it would be something that was very trippy and visually interesting and audio and visual complementing. So, it's very, very important that those go hand in hand and are synced together very well. In terms of the practical side, basically what happened was my first year of college, I was studying something totally kind of different, but I watched Wall-E for the first time in college, and then I was just so blown away by this movie. I was like, man, that was the best thing I've ever watched. And then, I saw the credits at the end. There was so many names. And I thought, there's no reason why I can't be one of those names. And then so I literally just went online and Googled, how do I get a job at Pixar? And then, went down this whole rabbit hole of like, okay, well, you need to know 3D. To know 3D, you need to know these software, blah, blah, blah. And so, yeah, I'm like basically self-taught. I spent time outside of college classes just like learning these skill sets. And then after my third year of college, I thought that I had, sort of gathered enough to sort of apply for jobs, and I applied to Pixar many years, in a row, and had always gotten rejected. So, by no means are my technical abilities, sort of at the cream of the top either. But I would say I have enough at least to get by. And those were mainly from just all the resources you can find on the internet, really, because there's so much now.
Yeah, that's super cool. So it wasn't like a formal education. I'm curious, what was your, just like a short answer, but what did you actually study in school?
So I mainly studied this program called Design Media Arts. And it was a very broad program that, we didn't really touch on, sort of like 3D animation. That wasn't in it at all. It was more sort of like, I would say, maybe like front end, or, like typography, graphic design, that kind of stuff. It was kind of like one of those programs where they show you a little bit of everything, and then, if you're interested in anything, you can either go really deep into it, or you can just sort of coast through the entire course and then not really be good at anything and then still graduate. But funnily enough, now that NFTs, are a thing, there's actually a lot of people who are prominent in the space that came from my program, which is crazy. So another artist named Kit, KYT on Instagram, like, she was also in my program, and how she works at Foundation, and she's also, prior to NFTs, was already a very acclaimed independent digital artist. And then one of my professors, his name is Casey Reese. He literally invented processing the design language, programming language. And he's also a big figure in NFTs now. And then also there's another artist, very well known in NFTs, called Rafiq Anadol. And he does a lot of really cool generative art, he was a TA of that program. So I guess, I don't know, maybe UCLA Design Media Arts has a special footprint in the world of NFTs.
Yeah, it's interesting. A lot of times you hear about these like small pockets of people that for whatever reason, like the microculture or like the language, the slang or whatever it might have been, the creativity, it results in like all these people from this very small group having like enormous success in a similar area. This sounds like it could be one of those. And so if you're looking for the next great artist in crypto or the like, maybe that's the group of people you want to talk to. I have two quick things I need to say just because I don't want to forget. One is I hope you reach back out to Pixar at some point. And two is I hope you dig up that first project you did with Yearn because I don't know. It seems like that should see the light at some point, maybe years down the road. But that sounded like an interesting project, and I think Pixar might put an asterisk on your name if it comes in by an email at this point more than they might have when you first graduated and things like this. And that would be really cool to see you guys work together at this point. And I totally agree. Their stuff is always amazing, whether it was when I was a kid or now. All of Pixar stuff is just really cool. So I know we're coming up on time, but maybe just a couple more questions, sort of off topic a little bit, but I myself am like very interested in pseudonymity and how it's sort of become more prevalent over the last couple of years. When I first started like my Twitter, and before that just a blog, and now the podcast, my real identity isn't really out there. And I sort of, that's intentional, and I have my various reasons for it, but you started off pseudonymous and still mostly function that way, although you've been sort of sufficiently doxxed by a number of different outlets and whatnot. But I'm curious, like, what was the original intent of not sort of building your brand around your real name? And, what was the experience of like sort of transitioning from having that sort of cover, which like I said, I can appreciate myself. It's sort of like freeing in a way, to, having your name out there. And now I'm sure people from like your real life for like reaching out all the time and things like that. I'm curious to hear how that sort of evolution has gone for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think for a while I felt like I was living sort of like a Hannah Montana double life situation where I had my sort of people pleaser online crypto persona that really none of my real life friends knew. And also because I think I'm probably, I'm a prideful person, and during that year of unemployment, I actually didn't tell a lot of unless, they were really close or something, but I didn't tell a lot of people that I was unemployed. And so, just, I don't know, it's dumb, but looking back, I honestly was just embarrassed, right? And then so, then obviously when I started doing this crypto stuff, I didn't think that people would understand, let alone think it's a real job. And then so I continued to just sort of keep that a secret from people in my real life, right? And then so, yeah, for the longest time, I think nobody had any idea what I was up to. And the first time that I was sufficiently doxxed, I would say, was probably when Fortune published that op-ed of me, and then just actually just used my real name. Obviously, as sort of things started picking up more and more, yeah, I've had people, from my pre-crypto life reach out and then say, hey, I saw you in this thing, that's crazy. And so it's been interesting. I definitely do hope that, going forward, I would like to stay somewhat pseudonymous. And initially, actually, I mean, it's also because my real name is really boring. Like, it's not good for SEO. Like, there's probably 5 million people on this earth that have the same name. So it was also just not very distinguishing, right? And then when I was creating my art Instagram, while I was literally, this was before crypto, like before, I was working at DeFi or anything. I just wanted a platform to publish my own digital art. And then so I had just noticed at the time that all these, cool, successful artists, independent artists on Instagram and stuff had, cool artist names. Like either just their natural name was a very cool and unique one, or they, created one. And being that my regular name is not cool nor unique, I thought that I had to create a better handle for it. And where people pleaser comes from is just, that's actually just how my personality was. It was one of those things where I was creating the page. I didn't want to put too much thought into it. So it was one of those things where, oh, this is the first thing that came to my mind. It's kind of my personality. So I'll just put it down. And then maybe if I get a chance to change it later, I will. And then everything happened to me so quickly that I just never got a chance to change it. But luckily, like many other happy accidents in my life, nowadays, I think people are always telling me that they think it's a really good name from a branding perspective. So I'm like, yeah, I totally meant to do that.
Yeah, I feel like if you were like super intentional about it, the way that you spelled people pleaser, like I've heard you talk about this where there's like 6 different ways that people spell it. And
Yeah.
I feel like for SEO or whatever purposes, you probably got maybe like half of the people who are looking for you find some different thing that they're not looking for because they put the wrong E's and A's in or whatever. But somehow, despite all of that, you've been able to rise up through it. So it's really cool. And I think it's interesting, like you mentioned the name, your name is really popular, but I did like a tweet, like if you actually have a name that's super popular, you almost have like built-in pseudonymity in a way, as long as you have
Mm,
like if your face isn't out there, I guess, which I think Fortune unfortunately did as well. But if it's just your name, then someone like Google's and they still like have no idea who you are basically.
yeah.
So it's kind of interesting, but and I'm sure, you're still very young, so maybe you can I've thought about this, like you could spin up another brand. Obviously, not to trivialize that, it's like incredibly hard, but if you have another profile one day, a pseudonymous profile, if yours isn't sort of, if you want to move past it or alongside it or something, you can use People Pleaser to spin up some new alias, and then you'll be, Hannah Montana, but like 3 of you or something like that. So that'd be pretty cool.
I
Um,
don't know that I have enough time to do that, but maybe.
yeah, no, it's hard enough to do one. All right, so last question, and I know we're running up on time, so I appreciate you sticking with it. But
Yeah, not at all.
People Pleaser, the name, describes you to some extent. I sort of view the word or like that the description of like a people pleaser, I see it as like a positive and a negative. And given that it's obviously a large part of who you are, but also now your name. What do you think are like the pros and cons of being a people pleaser?
Um, I definitely feel more often than not it's a curse. And it's actually it's nobody's fault but my own, really. I just sometimes I'm always just like, I don't understand how I am the way I am. It could be that I was born this way. It could also be, sort of environmentally affected, or just maybe a lack of self-confidence. But it actually just is impossible. And I have tried this, Jake, throughout my, short-lived crypto career up until this date, but short-lived, even though as in it's not been very long, like, but with high intensity and, high volumes of inbound, I have tried again and again to practice this muscle of saying no to people or projects or pitches that, I might not personally be interested in. And for whatever reason, I always fail. So now I have maybe some, like, either I'll ghost people, which is, I think, even worse than just saying no. So I feel extremely terrible about that. Or sometimes I just say yes and then it just doesn't happen, and then they'll also forget about it. I don't know, but it's a problem. And I think that's probably one of the biggest lessons and hardest lessons I have had to learn up until this point in my career. It's just how to properly say no to people and go against what is essentially my personality type. And that's also why we're doing this podcast, by the way, because I didn't want to do it. But then I was like, oh, I can't say. I'm just kidding. That was. I'm
I'm
totally joking.
I'm like I'm so glad that you're such a people pleaser because we wouldn't be on without it. But yeah, I think that's generally what I hear from people. I think I have a little bit of it myself, but I imagine it certainly gets challenging when the volume of inbound, like, for a lot of people, you can sort of manage to just say yes to a lot of things. And there's even people who like advocate for like saying yes to everything and like
Mhm.
all this stuff will work out. But on the other side, you have people who advocate for saying no to everything, and I think those tend to be the people who are just like constantly drowning in inbound, and you just have no time to sort of like pursue your own thing and have a free moment to break, and you end up recording podcasts with dumb people like me if you just go say yes to everything. So, nonetheless, I think it's obviously a great name, and maybe you will distance yourself from the characteristic over time. I think everyone has areas to improve. And I think it sounds like saying no is a muscle that you're increasingly flexing and hopefully will only get better and better at. But I want to thank you again for coming on and going over on time and everything like that. I do hope you follow up with Pixar. I want to hear about that. But appreciate you coming on. I guess just in closing, where can people follow you first of all, but also since we didn't get to like some of your latest projects, would love to hear just like the latest and greatest on what's going on like at this very moment in time, and what people can expect to see from you in the next months to come.
Sure. Well, first you can find me on Twitter as just people pleaser, as in PPLPLEASR with a one, because when I made the account, the original people pleaser was already taken. On Instagram, it's just people pleaser. In terms of what's going on right now, I am actually building a new project. I can't really talk about it yet, but I think it's something that I'm really excited about. Just because, sort of in that same way, to tie in with like what I was saying earlier about finally being able to do my own sort of creative visions for projects. Now it's like on beyond just a visual level, but also, on a conceptual and sort of like technical and everything level. I'm working on a project that, I am just personally really excited about, instead of, doing promotions for like a DeFi project and things like this. So, and I do hope that, if it works out, it will be something that people will enjoy in the Web3 space. And so, I mean, yeah, I'm not here to like plug anything, but since you asked, that's what I'm working on right now. I'll probably come out sometime in Q1 of next year, which is cool and exciting. Yeah, it'll be a total experiment. Who knows if it'll go, like really well or really terribly, but I'm excited regardless.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm sure it will be fine, at the very least fine, if not like historic, and get you on the cover of the next magazine. But again, thank you very much. It was a real pleasure talking with you, and look forward to having people be able to listen.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed this conversation.